What if the trajectory of American history, so often synonymous with the unfettered pursuit of capitalism, had veered dramatically, not towards its free market zenith, but towards a profound socialist experiment? Imagine a nation forged in revolution and individual liberty, yet reshaped by a collective ethos, where the very fabric of society, from its economy to its culture, was woven with threads of communal ownership and social welfare. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's an exploration into a plausible historical turning point, a hidden path where socialist ideology gained significant, lasting traction, fundamentally reshaping the United States as we know it. To truly grasp this alternative reality, we must first understand the ground from which it could have sprung. The late 19th and early 20th centuries in America were a crucible of change. Rapid industrialization, while propelling the nation to unprecedented economic heights, simultaneously created chasms of inequality. Towering fortunes were amassed, but at the cost of widespread poverty, relentless labor exploitation, and an undercurrent of social unrest that simmered beneath the surface of progress. Factories roared, producing wealth, but also deafening the cries of child laborers and workers toiling in unsafe conditions for meager wages. There were no safety nets, only the brutal logic of survival of the fittest. It was in this landscape of stark contrasts that socialist and populist movements began to flourish. Figures like Eugene V. Debs, a charismatic labor leader and five-time Socialist Party presidential candidate, captivated audiences with visions of a more equitable society. Organizations like the Industrial Workers of the World, or Wobblies, championed radical unionism, advocating for one big union to overthrow capitalism. Utopian communities, though often short-lived, dotted the landscape, testaments to the yearning for alternative ways of living and organizing. Agrarian populism, particularly in the South and Midwest, railed against the power of banks and railroads, demanding greater economic justice for farmers. While the progressive era did address some of these grievances, introducing regulations and reforms, it largely operated within and ultimately preserved the capitalist framework, leaving deeper structural issues untouched. Now, let's pinpoint the critical juncture, the plausible divergence. Imagine if the economic crises of this period had been even more severe, or if key political figures, facing overwhelming public pressure, had made different choices. What if the Haymarket Affair, or the Pullman strike, had ignited a more unified and effective labor movement, one that avoided internal schisms and faced less brutal state-sanctioned suppression? Picture a scenario where socialist parties, instead of being marginalized, achieved critical mass in key industrial states, translating widespread discontent into significant political power, perhaps even capturing a presidential election. Consider the Great Depression, but with a pre-existing stronger socialist infrastructure and public sentiment already primed for radical change. Instead of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, which fundamentally reformed capitalism, what if the crisis had birthed a socialist New Deal? This wouldn't be a sudden, violent revolution, but a gradual yet profound political and economic reorientation, a creeping shift in national priorities and power structures driven by popular demand and political will. Such a monumental shift would, of course, not go unchallenged. Powerful vested interests, the titans of industry, the financiers of Wall Street, and conservative political factions would fiercely resist. The ideological clashes would be intense, pitting the cherished American ideal of individual liberty against the burgeoning demand for collective welfare. Public opinion would be a raging storm, a nation deeply divided, with widespread support for the new order in some quarters, and fierce, often violent, opposition in others. The media, then as now, would play a crucial role, shaping perceptions and influencing the narrative surrounding this unprecedented societal transformation. either championing the new path or condemning it as an un-American betrayal. All brought under public ownership. Even nascent technological sectors, critical to the nation's future, would likely be integrated into this new collective framework. This wouldn't necessarily mean a monolithic, centrally planned economy stifling all innovation. Instead, this American socialist experiment might explore a hybrid model, balancing centralized planning for essential services and infrastructure with a significant role for decentralized worker cooperatives. These cooperatives, owned and managed by their employees, could flourish in various sectors, fostering a sense of direct ownership and democratic control over production. Trade unions, once locked in adversarial battles with corporations, would be utterly transformed. Their role would shift from bargaining for better wages and conditions to becoming co-managers of industry, participating directly in decision-making and resource allocation. The initial economic disruption caused by such a monumental shift would be undeniable, but proponents would argue it would pave the way for a period of greater stability, equitable redistribution of wealth, and a focus on societal needs over individual greed. This American model would consciously attempt to address historical criticisms of socialism, striving to maintain efficiency and innovation through incentivized worker participation and a focus on public good, rather than purely state-driven mandates. The political landscape, too, would be irrevocably altered. Power dynamics would shift dramatically, with a significantly stronger federal government overseeing expanded social programs and economic planning. The traditional two-party system, the Democratic and Republican parties, would face an existential crisis. They might adapt to the new reality, fragmenting into new factions, or simply be replaced by a dominant socialist party or a broad coalition of socialist and labor-aligned entities. A critical question would emerge regarding civil liberties. Would freedom of speech, assembly, and individual expression be preserved under a state prioritizing collective welfare? Or would the demands of economic planning and societal unity lead to greater state control and potential suppression of dissent, even if framed as for the common good? The Supreme Court, that venerable institution, would find itself interpreting a radically new constitutional framework, or perhaps even facing fundamental reforms to align with the new national ethos. Washington, D.C. would evolve into an even more powerful epicenter, not just of political governance, but of economic and social engineering, with new ministries and agencies dedicated to national planning and welfare. Social and cultural transformations would ripple through every aspect of American life. Universal social programs, healthcare, education from cradle to grave, affordable housing, and robust unemployment benefits would become fundamental rights, not privileges. The very definition of the American dream would be rewritten, moving away from individual wealth accumulation as the ultimate goal towards collective well-being, social contribution, and community flourishing. Class structure would see a significant reduction in income inequality, though new forms of social stratification, perhaps based on merit within the socialist system or political influence, might emerge. Culturally, there would be a pronounced shift towards community, public art, and a shared national purpose, influencing American art, literature, and media to reflect these new values. Even the role of religion would be challenged. Traditional American religious institutions would need to adapt to a more secular or collectivist state ideology, finding new ways to integrate faith into a society prioritizing different values. However, this transformation would not be uniform across the vast American landscape. Regional variations and challenges would be immense. The industrial heartland, with its long history of labor struggles and worker solidarity, would likely embrace socialist policies with enthusiasm. Conversely, the agrarian South and parts of the Midwest, steeped in traditions of individualism and facing complex racial dynamics, might exhibit significant resistance. Socialist ideals of equality could be complicated by pre-existing social hierarchies. In the resource-rich West, industries like mining and timber could become state-owned, profoundly impacting local economies and cultures. New York City, once the undisputed global financial hub, would be transformed into a center of nationalized industry and perhaps even a beacon for international socialist diplomacy. The unifying challenge for this socialist America would be to reconcile these diverse regional identities and historical realities with a singular, unifying socialist ideology, forging a new national identity from a multitude of perspectives. The United States, now a beacon of socialist experimentation, would project a radically different image on the world stage. The Cold War, as we know it, would likely never occur. The bipolar world of capitalism versus communism would be fundamentally altered, perhaps replaced by a different global ideological struggle or even an era of unique cooperation. Relations with the Soviet Union would be particularly fascinating. Would they be rivals, two distinct socialist models competing for influence and legitimacy, or would they find common ground, forming a powerful unified bloc that reshaped global power dynamics? A socialist America would almost certainly adopt a different stance on decolonization and the emerging Third World, actively supporting liberation movements and non-aligned nations, thereby accelerating the dismantling of traditional colonial empires and redrawing the geopolitical map. International trade and alliances would be redefined, with America potentially forming new economic blocs based on socialist principles, challenging existing capitalist-dominated institutions and advocating for a more equitable global economic order. The United Nations, rather than being a platform for the capitalist-communist ideological battles of our timeline, might become a more powerful institution, or perhaps a different kind of arena for ideological debate among diverse socialist and non-socialist nations. Internally, the long-term sustainability of the American socialist model would face its own set of challenges. Questions of innovation, often seen as a byproduct of capitalist competition, would need new answers. Would state-controlled research and development match the dynamism of a market-driven system? Or would bureaucratic inefficiency stifle creativity? The balance between collective good and individual freedoms would be a constant negotiation, with potential for internal dissent and reform movements arising even within a socialist state. Civil rights, too, would continue to evolve. Would a socialist framework inherently address racial and gender inequality more effectively by dismantling economic disparities, or would new forms of discrimination, perhaps based on political conformity or access to state resources, emerge? Technological progress would undoubtedly occur, but its direction and pace might differ, prioritizing societal needs over consumer demand, potentially leading to advancements in public infrastructure, renewable energy, and medical research, rather than purely commercial products. Succeeding generations, born into this socialist reality, would perceive their nation's founding principles not through the lens of individual enterprise, but through a narrative of collective achievement and social responsibility, adapting and reinterpreting the American spirit to fit their world. Reflecting on this enduring "what if" reveals a tapestry of potential outcomes. On the positive side, such a path might have eradicated extreme poverty, ensured universal access to healthcare and education, and fostered a greater sense of community and national purpose. Environmental protection, with centralized planning, could have become a top priority, leading to a more sustainable industrial future. However, the potential downsides are equally significant. Limitations on individual enterprise and ambition, challenges to democratic processes if power became too centralized, and the ever-present risk of suppression of dissent in the name of unity or efficiency. The very question of American identity, so often linked to rugged individualism and the pursuit of liberty, would have been profoundly redefined, or perhaps rechanneled into a collective pursuit of a more equitable society. This philosophical reflection underscores the sheer fragility of history. how seemingly small decisions, moments of crisis, or the rise and fall of specific ideologies can fundamentally alter the course of entire civilizations. The American experiment, whether capitalist or socialist, highlights the constant, dynamic interplay of human agency and the inexorable forces of history, forever shaping what a nation can become.